and I am representing the applicant today, which would be Barnet Council and the Pathfinder Group, who are proposing this project at 129 Hamilton Road. I just want to ask quickly, can everybody hear me? If you can't hear me, then please switch on your mic and just quickly give me a, yep, great, I've got some thumbs up, great. Just to say that before I start, that this session is going to be recorded because it is being posted online as part of the consultation process. So, you know, it will go online essentially. What that means is that if you do want to talk today and have your camera on or off, it really doesn't make a difference. But, you know, we will move through the session and it will be recorded. So I think I'll introduce the team to you first. So as I said, my name is Chantal Williams, and I'll just go around the room, starting with the two Matthews.
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Matt Raleigh, and I work for London Councils. So we are the sort of amalgamation of all London's directors of children's services working together on specific projects.
And hi, I'm Matthew Knights. I'm the Strategic Development Manager for the London Accommodation Pathfinder, and essentially we'll be managing the project across London. Thank you.
Can I just quickly introduce Nathaniel?
Yes, I'm Nathaniel. I work for HTA. I'll be supporting Chantal with the planning process for this application. Thank you.
Thanks. And then I'll go to Ben.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Ben Thomas. I'm an Assistant Director in Family Services at Barnet Council.
Great stuff. And finally, Samaya. Want to quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning. My name is Samaya. I'll be project managing the scheme and being your host this morning and this evening for this presentation.
Great stuff. Okay, we'll move into the presentation. I think the way this will work is that we'll provide the presentation and give an overview of the project, and then at the end we'll move on to questions. Hopefully we won't be too long and we'll have enough time for your questions. The session is about an hour long, so we will quickly wrap through our presentation and move on to your questions. Obviously this presentation is about 129 Hamilton Road and the proposals there. It's a project being proposed by the London Accommodation Pathfinder Group and Barnet Council, and is going to be supported by, well, financially supported by the Ministry of Justice and Youth Justice Board, and it's a project essentially aimed at children aged between 16 and 17 who are within the youth justice system. The objectives to this, which we'll touch upon throughout the presentation, are quite varied, but essentially aim to sort of tackle complex issues around the disproportionality in outcomes in the youth justice system, particularly of male children from a BAME background, and essentially it tries to offer an alternative approach for these children within the youth justice system. So the purpose of today is to really introduce the proposals, aims and objectives, and to sort of explain some of the project matters which relate to sort of, you know, how the site was selected, how children are assessed, and the key management approach for both the children and also the site, and how residents will be kept involved throughout. We're seeking formal feedback today, sorry, not today, by tomorrow from residents who are participating in these two events. I know that that's quite a quick turnaround time, but we are sort of moving towards, just based on the timeline below that you can see, we are sort of at a key stage here where we're moving towards the application submission. And during that process, the local authority will also be asking for residents' feedback on the application. And I think the purpose of today is to sort of focus on the management issues for both future residents of the site and also the management of the site. And so these are being used to sort of feed into a draft management plan which will go in with the application. So the things that we're sort of setting out today are things that we would like your feedback on, but also which will feed into the draft management plan, but also any other feedback that you may have. And then you would also get a chance to also comment on the application itself. So just to go back slightly on the timeline of the project. So the property itself was purchased by Barnet back in February 21, earlier this year. And then between May and June, we have contacted the local authority, Barnet Council, to engage officers in pre-app discussions. And then in July, we've gotten to the point where we're ready to start consultation. So we're holding 2 events today, one now, one later on this evening. And we've also briefly spoken to ward councillors, which we'll pick up later on. And moving forward, we're sort of working towards the submission of this application at the end of this month, with the aim to getting the project to planning committee in September. And then the actual project itself, if successful at planning, we're aiming to have the first cohort of residents at the property by November. So that's the project timeline. It's just important to note that the project itself hasn't started. We haven't submitted an application. I'm going to move on to Ben, who will talk a bit more, Matthew, who will talk a bit more about the project initiative and why it was started.
Yes, sure. So, so the origins, as Chantal has said, of this project are in certain disproportionalities and certain sort of poor existing outcomes that are experienced by London children. So in particular, London children are much more likely than children around the rest of the country to go to custody for a similar set of offences or allegations that children in the rest of the country would expect to be supported in the community for. Allied to that, there's a very strong body of evidence to show that children who can be kept in the community when appropriate perform much better. They commit less further offences, and their future life outcomes around education, health, all of those things which ends up making an important contribution to society, but also sort of reducing further harms and further costs to society, are improved where those children can be worked with effectively in the community. In London currently, there is a lack of alternative options, which is one reason why courts in London are more disposed to use custody when a community option may be appropriate for a child. The rates at the moment are roughly twice as many London children compared to children in the rest of the country, and they're very highly disproportionately from a Black and Asian or minority ethnic background. So this Pathfinder has been generated for 2 or 3 key reasons. The first is to give that alternative to London children, the alternative that we know it will be more effective. We believe that will be more effective at reducing offending and benefiting those children's life outcomes, thereby benefiting the children themselves, their families, but also communities and society as a whole. I think we're passing to Ben now to talk about the property.
Great, thanks, Matt. So yeah, for this project, we were looking for a property that was on the market that had at least 6 and ideally 7 bedrooms, because it needed to accommodate up to 5 children and then a minimum of 2 support staff as well. We were looking for rooms that needed to be of the right kind of size and layout, and there needed to be sufficient communal areas for the project. There also needed to be some good transport links so that children could get to all the different things that they're going to need to while they're at the property. So to job opportunities, to training, other appointments. So it needed good transport links. An assessment was also undertaken by our community safety colleagues, and that involved a range of partners, including the local police. So it met all of those criteria, and then the fact that it had an HMO license also meant that it would be a less significant change than if it had been a kind of standard residential property, because it'll essentially go from being an uncontrolled and unsupported HMO to being a managed property and being managed by a specialist accommodation provider, which we'll go into a bit more detail later on in the slides. It also meant that it met fire standards in terms of having a fire alarm system in place and fire doors. So that was why this property was chosen for the project. I'll hand back to Matt.
Okay, so I was really keen to explain something of the process of how the children who will come to this property and benefit from this project will be selected, and in particular how the risk assessments around that work, because they're absolutely critical to success for those children, success for those projects, and to ensure that it's safely managed within the local community. And it's something that that a range of people have taken a great deal of care around designing a highly robust process for that selection. So it starts with the child themselves, who has to A, give their consent, but B, show the necessary motivation, and the necessary characteristics to suggest that they're really going to benefit from this particular type of placement. So it's not going to be reluctant children. There'll be a high level of motivation to participate in and benefit from this provision. If that first test is passed, and the Youth Justice Service believe that it's appropriate to proceed, we then move into a multi-agency assessment on the child. That draws existing knowledge and data from a range of different agencies who may have come across the child or their family. That would include social services, health services, education services, the police, and youth justice services if the child's already known, as well as any other significant service. It may be a sort of mentor or some sort of voluntary sector service that works with the child and may have a relationship with them. And each of those will be asked to provide their information, which will be pooled into a multi-agency risk assessment around the child. Subject to that assessment, there's then a discussion at a multi-agency panel, which represented by those agencies I've just referred to, about whether it is appropriate for the child to to progress into the placement. As I've said, that decision's taken on a few bases, including whether the child will benefit from the placement and levels of motivation, but critical to that decision is whether the child can be safely managed and supported within that environment, both for the staff there and for the other residents there, but just as importantly in terms of the local community and the immediate residents to the property. If those tests are passed and the child enters the property, they are then supported by that multi-agency team within the property. So the property is run by a specialist accommodation provider, and we'll talk a little bit in a moment about how it's staffed and run and what that support looks like. But it's not them acting alone. Those other services I've mentioned, whether it's the police, whether it's social services, whether it's health services, including sort of mental health services or counselling services, will still work with that child and work as a whole team to support the child in that placement and to ensure that it's safe. If we could move on to the next slide. Okay, some practical details around how the property will be managed, and as Chantel's referenced, these will be captured within a draft property management plan. These are just some of the sort of key details around that, and we'll also account for your comments to us about within that property management plan. So it's a maximum of 5 children. They'll all be male children, and they'll all enter the property when aged between 16 to 17 years old. Our research suggests that that's the age that's most likely to benefit from this type of provision. I've talked already a bit about how the assessment of children prior to occupation will work. There'll be a number of expectations made of the child within the property, both from the specialist accommodation provider, so they'll have their own sets of rules around behaviour and what's expected, but also from the youth justice system itself. So, for example, all children who go into this particular provision will have an electronically monitored curfew, so that we know that they're going to be in at night. They come in at a certain time, and that's a way of supporting the child to kind of keep to a set of boundaries that will help them, but also assure others. Each child will have an intensive support programme that's tailored to their particular needs. All of them will include certain core characteristics, such as a big focus on education, employment and training. We know that that's an absolutely key factor in turning lives around and building pro-social lives. We're also going to encourage volunteering and various projects which will be supported by Barnet around community reparation, getting involved in community projects outside of the home, so that those children can contribute constructively. Each of the children within the property will also be offered counselling services, have their wider sort of health and well-being needs assessed, and will be offered individually tailored support around that. Some of that support will take place at the property, and some of it will take place away from the property. Where you've got professionals visiting the property, that will take place between 9 o'clock to 7 o'clock on weekdays, but as we'll see in a moment, that's not the only time that the property is staffed and the children supported. If we could move on, please. Yes, so some more details about how the property will work. As I've mentioned, there will be a specialist accommodation provider running the property, who've got a track record of experience and success in working with these cohort of children. They will staff the property with a minimum of 2 staff, 24 hours a day and 365 days a year. So that importantly, that includes overnight and at weekends. As I mentioned earlier, the specialist support doesn't work in isolation, but will combine with various partner services from outside of the property. Key amongst those is the relationship with the local police, which we are already in the process of kind of defining how exactly that will work, but we'll be expecting the Safer Neighbourhood team to visit the property, to have their own relationship with the children there, and we'll be having regular meetings with the police and also wards meetings, and to be honest, any other community forum that seems appropriate, to have a look at how the property is progressing, what's working well, and if there are any challenges, what needs to happen to overcome them. There'll be a range of sort of practical restrictions and sort of management. Examples of that sort of include there's a flat roof at the property, and we're going to put in place the necessary sort of physical barriers to prevent access to that. The fences in the garden will be heightened to increase privacy for the neighbours. Access to the garden will be supervised and between certain hours. It will not be late at night. And we will have we'll be using CCTV at the entrance, at the front and the rear of the property, facing inwards, and that rather than sort of out at any public or other spaces, and that's to make sure that we monitor access to the property. We could move on, please. Okay, so we know that to maximise the success of the Pathfinder, engagement with yourselves, with the local community, and those partnerships outside of the property itself is absolutely critical. It's why we are seeking your views today on how the property can be managed. And why we're consulting you ahead of the formal planning application. Chantel's already talked through a bit of the process about how that will work, so I won't repeat that here. A couple of other kind of key proposals from us around how it would work would be to provide the immediate neighbours with a 24-hour-a-day contact telephone number for the management of the property, so that's available to them. To set up a forum to meet monthly with residents, certainly in the early months of the provision setting up and running, where both the accommodation manager and the police would be present. And I've mentioned already that there's a real wish to develop community projects to get those young people working pro-socially and constructively with members of the local community around a variety of projects to benefit them and the community. Okay, that's Chantel. Right,
yep,
okay.
I'm back. So that brings us on to our sort of question and answer session point in the presentation. And I think the best way for this to work is for individuals who have questions to raise their hands. And I'll come to you each individually. The raising of the hands is a sort of button at the top of your Teams. If I can just see anyone raising their hands, I can't see anyone. Oh, I've got someone. Gordon, would you like to ask a question to the panel?
Hi. So there's a number of questions that I have, but maybe you can stop me when someone else wants to ask something. But first of all, just to point out, I think that the timeline in terms of the feedback request is unfair. You can't ask us to send formal feedback by tomorrow. We have so many people that have jobs and have taken time off to join this meeting, and it's just it doesn't show much in terms of how much you actually want our feedback to say, we'll take your feedback, but you've got 24 hours to provide it. It's just unfair. I think you should. That's
a fair comment, and we will take that on board. That's a fair comment, and we'll take that on board. Yeah. Did you have another question?
Yeah. So in terms of the project itself, so first of all, what kind of crime, so to speak, would people have committed before they put into this scheme?
Yeah, before they're considered.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll hand you over to Matthew, who can come back to you on that one.
Yes, hi. So we don't have a formal list of crimes or offences because the assessment of the children is a bit more complex and nuanced than that. So the straight answer is that they could have committed a variety of offences, but the nature of the offence will be assessed alongside the child's individual circumstances.
We're talking about sexual offences, knife crime. I mean, what are the largest offences that you could see someone being put in this house?
Okay, so you can sense my reluctance to give you a categoric answer because the assessment process is more complicated than that. I think it's almost inconceivable that a child who had committed a sexually harmful offence would be assessed as being appropriate for this provision when looking at both that offence and their wider circumstances. So no, I think that is extremely unlikely. Possibly more unlikely because there's a spectrum of such things. Might be a child that's gotten involved in drugs one way or another. I'm sure you appreciate that there's a kind of range from children who are on the sort of edge of that experience to children who are very heavily entrenched within it. So that might be an example of a scenario where we look both at the offence and at the child themselves, the set of circumstances, above all that criteria of can this be managed safely within the property and within the local community before reaching that decision.
Has this been tried anywhere else?
So it hasn't been tried in its current format, not precisely in this format anywhere else. There are children are frequently placed within the social care system where accommodation is deemed to be a really important feature in improving their life chances and giving the courts an alternative to sending them to custody. So that does happen, but it doesn't happen in as organised or specialised a way as we're proposing in this instance, where we're proposing to have a supported accommodation provider who specialises in supporting children of this nature. There is a wider evidence base behind very categoric evidence base actually to show that that working with children residentially in the community as opposed to sending them to custody where that can be done safely and appropriately is more effective, and I can share some of that research and evidence with the group if that's something that you'd like.
Okay, I don't see anyone else with a hand up, so I'm going to keep going unless someone else puts their hand up. In terms of that,
sorry, can I just interrupt? Is there anybody else with another question? Sorry. Yep. Okay, we do have a few more others. Sorry, Benji. Is it Benji?
Yeah.
Benji, I'll come back to you.
Okay.
So keep your hand raised and I'll come back to you. Can we have, I'm really sorry, is it Roman?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Roman. Do
Yeah,
you mind
likewise.
sharing
Yeah,
your
likewise.
question?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions, so feel free to stop me and come back as well after others, and feel free
Okay,
to
I think we'll,
by your answers as well.
yeah, I think, sorry, can we just limit it to 2 and then I'll move on to, is it Moshe? And then for 2 questions, if they've got 2 questions, and I'll go back to Benji, then come back to you.
Sure. Whose financial risk and reward is it in having purchased and then renting this property out?
Sorry, I think this might be one for Ben.
Yeah, I think I was going to say that.
So the arrangement is that Open Door Homes are purchasing the property, and then it's being leased by Barnet Council, and then subleased to the project. So the project will be paying the rent, but the risk on the actual property sits with an organisation called Barnet Homes.
Or Open Door Homes?
Sorry, yeah, Open Door Homes. Yeah.
Yeah, and then in terms of the property, you mentioned you were looking for a detached or semi-detached. Why is that a specific criteria?
I think it was to minimise the numbers of direct neighbours for the project, and I appreciate this is an end of terrace house, so there are neighbours on one side directly attached.
Thank you, Roman. Can we move on to, am I pronouncing it right, Moshe?
Yes, just want to say that when I see that this, you said you have HMO license, but I do believe that this.
Sorry, there's a lot of noise in the background.
Okay, so let the other people ask the question.
There's a lot of noise in the background. Sorry, could you just start again? Okay, you want to wait?
Yeah, I'll wait then. Okay.
Did you have a question? Okay, did you have a question? No. Okay, we'll go back to you, Benji.
Okay, I'm just wondering whether why there's no kind of conflict of interest here in the planning process, because obviously this is kind of a Barnet scheme and it's going to the Barnet planning committee. Why? How is that not a conflict of interest in terms of whether it will be approved?
I can answer that. So Barnet Council are obviously the applicant, and they are going to Barnet's local planning authority to seek permission. First of all, the local planning authority acts independently. So they assess all applications. They should be assessing all independently. And this isn't independently of submitted, including so in that respect, there isn't a conflict of interest because they are operating independently and following guidelines set by national and local and regional government on the appropriate application of planning policy and how to assess applications coming through the system. It isn't unusual for Barnet Council to be submitting applications to Barnet Local Authority to assess. I mean, this is a type of scheme whereby they're looking at a change of use, but if you think about Barnet as a whole, and I'm talking about the area, there are applications for regeneration projects on estates or large areas or infill development, which equally are applications by the council or Barnet Homes or Barnet Open Door Homes, which go to the council to be independently assessed by their local planning authority. I hope that answers the question.
And when the date is set for the planning committee, there's a lot of Jewish holidays in September, and a lot of the neighbours are obviously Jewish. Will that be taken into consideration that it's not going to be set on a Jewish holiday so that no one can be there?
The committees are normally held, I think it's on a Wednesday or Thursday evenings. And with the planning process itself, the council will write to local residents to ask for them to submit their views on the application, and then on the evening of the committee itself, and those should be used as part of the assessment. So in their reports, they will will summarise some of the comments coming through from the local community. Then when it comes on to the planning committee itself, local residents will have a chance to register to speak at the committees. I don't know how far Barnet local planning authority sort of work around Jewish holidays. I suspect that they have dates set in advance, which is what I've seen on their system, and that those have been sort of developed around other people's diaries and also availability. I've been to committees myself, and I have seen members of the Jewish community on the committee, as well as those in the audience looking to speak. So I would assume that they are set at an appropriate date and time, which do not conflict with holidays. But I think I'd need to ask an officer about that specifically. Okay, Ronan, did you have any more questions?
Just before my questions, can you clarify what LPA is an abbreviation for?
Oh, Local Planning Authority. I do apologise.
Okay, and what's this type of property and its use officially called? Is it called a remand house or something else? Or?
No. I think, Matthew, you can come in on this one. What would it be called? So, I mean, in terms of planning terms, at the moment, it's actually referred to in its current use as a house of multiple occupation. It will then move into a different class, which is a residential class, so class C, and it will be a managed class. So it's a bit like a step up from, I wouldn't say a step up, but you normally have C3, which is your traditional home that families occupy. Then you have accommodation, which is specifically for elder people, so there's some sort of management involved. And then you have a class, which this will come under, which is another C3, C2 B class, which is essentially a residential class, which is more managed. I'm trying to think of some examples, but so I'll come offline.
C2B, is that what it's?
Yeah, I'll come offline and I'll come back to you on this one, okay. Which is sort of around a more managed residential accommodation. But Matthew will be able to confirm what it will be called outside of sort of planning policy, planning world, planning speak.
Yeah, so in the children's services world, we would call this supported accommodation. It's not a children's home, which is something for younger children. It operates to a different regulatory framework. This would fall under supported accommodation for 16, 17.
In terms of what was mentioned during the presentation was that the property was chosen for its property characteristics, because obviously it's kind of been an HMO, has a certain number of bedrooms and so on. So has any thought been given or consideration being given to the communal and neighbourhood context within which a property exists, or has Barnet or open door homes just purchased any property that met the characteristics of X bedrooms, X HMO, and detached or semi-detached?
I think we'll go back to Ben on that. I'm just going to go back to the number of bedrooms, but it was also looking at the local transport links, and also not just that, but outside of that, they also had local community crime officers who,
Yeah, sorry, I'm struggling to hear that bit, but yeah, I think Chantel covered it broadly. I mean, yeah, the transport links were a critical part of it, and then there was an assessment undertaken by the Community Safety Partnership involving a number of partners to look at the community context.
Okay. I'm going to move on to Moshe at the moment. Are you able to? Are you there? Are you? Do you have a question?
You said that they're coming at the age of 16. Question is that what age are they going to leave?
Ah, right. Yes. This is a good question. It's something that we haven't actually responded to. I'll let Matthew talk about that point.
Yeah, this is a stepping stone for these children. It's not somewhere that they'll be residing long term. So they'll come into the property aged either 16 or 17. It's conceivable that they may stay long enough to see that you know, someone who's 17 and a half might see their 18th birthday in the accommodation. But for most placements, we would envisage them being around about a sort of six month period of time. That's not hard and fast. It depends a bit on the child's circumstances and their needs, but give or take 6 months. We'll be actively looking from the start of their placement as to where their move on option is, whether it's back to their family at home or whether it's on to a more independent supported facility afterwards.
Are these children from the Barnet Borough, or are they coming from outside the Barnet Borough?
So the LAP is it's a partnership between Barnet and its immediate local authority neighbours. So it's a group called North Central London. So children can be placed from each of those areas. So it will be Barnet children and children from the immediate bordering local authorities.
And has any study been conducted to see the effect on the local areas, on the influence of the local of children in the area, and yeah, the effect on the local area?
I'm sorry,
I missed the start of that question.
Has any study been done to assess the risk to the local area and to the influence on the local area?
Yeah, so that will have been what Ben mentioned. So when it was proposed for this area, the Barnet Community Safety Partnership was consulted and gave their approval for it to go ahead. So that would have involved Barnet services, also local police services. I don't know exactly who else sits on the Community Safety Partnership, but it would have been a range of other partners, health partners, some voluntary sector partners. Yeah, so they were consulted and felt that this was a suitable location for the property.
Can I just jump in here and ask if anybody else had any questions from within the call at the moment? No. Okay. I don't know who we was. Sorry, was that a question from you, Benji, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were there any more questions from you, Romain?
From me, yeah, I've got as much as time as you will provide, I've got questions for.
Well, can we just have another question from you? Hopefully we're sort of ticking off some of the things that might be answered, might be a question from Benji or Moshe at this point in time.
What's the threshold in terms of misbehavior that would get someone expelled from this house?
I think that's something for you, Matthew.
Yeah, so it's almost impossible to be completely categoric about that. It will be a judgment about whether that behaviour is either unmanageable or unsafe. And if it cannot be safely managed, then that placement will be terminated. The speed with which it's terminated will depend on exactly what the situation is. But if something gets out of control and is unsafe immediately, the placement will be ended immediately.
So if, for example, they're getting arrested outside of the area for continued drug dealing, for example, then you're saying as long as they're manageable within this property and this area, they would still be kept within the property. It wouldn't necessarily stop them being put out into the community.
No, I'm not saying that at all. And what I am saying is that every occasion that happens, you have an individual set of circumstances, and what I'm not able to do is to kind of give a hard and fast response to how individual lives will be managed in a hypothetical set of circumstances. Various other parties would have views and roles to play within that. If they get arrested, the police will have views and a role to play within that, as will the courts. These children will be, as I've mentioned, on kind of stringent conditions which would be breached by committing further offences, and there will be a consequence to that. What I can't do is to kind of, give you every scenario and every specific consequence at this point.
On a similar vein, how much trouble does the house need to attract for it to stop, to cease having this use?
I'm not sure how to answer that question.
I mean, for example, if there's a report on a monthly basis,
a highly subjective viewpoint, we will want to see the house being managed safely, for the people within it, for the staff, and for the local community, and we'll expect for that to be the case. We will also expect that should any difficulties arise, the supported accommodation provider makes every effort to address those, including through engagement with the local community. But there will be a judgment, and through the engagement with residents, you will be part of that judgment around where those thresholds lie.
I just want to sort of jump in here, following Matthew's response, and say that the whole point of this is to ensure that the property is well managed and that these children are offered an alternative to a custodial sentence, and that they are set within the community. It is not within the interest of the provider to effectively allow the home to become problematic, because it does not benefit them and it does not benefit the children, and it will definitely not benefit local residents. The aim isn't to create conflict between the use over the use of the site, the occupants and local residents. It seeks to be positive, hence why there are several measures in place, such as the community meetings with local police and community groups. There's opportunities for the community to step forward themselves and seek engagement from either the residents themselves, or to make sure they are in contact with the management team to address any issues. So I think I can certainly appreciate the nervousness around this, but I think it's important to understand that the point of this is to create a secure and safe environment for children to overcome the issues that they're going through, and to do that within a community setting without causing any disruption to existing members of the community. I
think that's exactly right. The one other thing that I'd add is that the project will be judged on its success at achieving those things. So that includes reducing reoffending and improving children's life outcomes. And ultimately, its funding and its future is contingent upon that. So yes, just echoing Chantel's point, really, that yes, all the focus is going to be on making sure that this is an extremely well-run provision.
I just want to come back to the point on use class in planning terms. I do have to apologise. It's class C2A, and it's in planning terms. It's described as secure residential properties. Do we have any more questions on the panel? Anyone else other than Benji, Roman, and Moshe? Did you ask a question in the end? You're on mute at the moment, so nope. Okay, we'll take two more questions, one from Benji and one from Roman. Okay. Benji, do you want to go first?
Can I ask, you spoke about the supervisors. So who are the supervisors, and what kind of qualifications or background will they have? Is there any more detail on also like the timings of curfews and when they'll be allowed in the garden and that type of thing?
Yeah. Okay. So Matthew, if you want to kick off with some of the background to the staff, or maybe it's easier to start off with some of the, use of the garden situation scenario.
Yeah. Okay. So there's two separate questions there. If I start with the garden, I'll just quickly tee up Matt Knight, who might be a bit better positioned than me to talk about what will be a tendering and procurement process to secure an accommodation provider, and who will have to satisfy us that they've got the particular skill set to manage the property. But yeah, in terms of the garden, as it is currently drafted within the property management plan, children would have access between 7 o'clock in the morning up until 10 o'clock at night, under the supervision of a staff member within the garden. So they can have access during those times, but that doesn't mean that things like noise, for example, would not be monitored or dealt with if there was an issue during those times. Matt, are you able to say anything about the tendering process and what sort of criteria are in the service spec?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we are currently out to market now, so we don't have a provider actually in place, but we're currently out to market and going through the whole tendering process. It is going to be a real strict evaluation panel. The provider will need to have at least three years minimum experience in working with the cohort that we are presenting today, in a sense of who would be at the property. They will have to have a range of skill sets across their structure of support staff, which include psychologists, counsellors, social workers, and key work staff. And there'll be a range of skill sets that we are really rigorously going to be monitoring and evaluating over the next 6 to 8 weeks. Part of the process as well is that they'll be doing presentations alongside scenario questions, which actually relate to the children's circumstances and characteristics that we feel may be in the property.
Great stuff. Roman, do you have a final question that you wish to ask the panel?
Yeah. Obviously this is for lack of a better word, a guinea pig project. Has such an attempt to create such a property already been made within the North Central region that has failed?
I think we can go back to Matthew on that. But I think from what he said before that this hasn't been tried in such a way, and so, correct me if I'm wrong, but this hasn't been done in Barnet or any of the neighbouring North London local authorities, is it?
No, I think this question has been asked and answered already. No, I don't believe it has been in its current format. I wouldn't describe it as a guinea pig project in any way. It's a project beneath which there's a substantial evidence base to suggest that these residential alternatives are going to be more appropriate.
In the interest of time, I was just wondering around whether such an application already failed, not whether already got to the stage of having been implemented.
No, we haven't submitted an application for this site or any other site in Barnet or any other local authority. Okay, I hope that answers the question. I'm going to quickly move on to our final sort of conclusion and summing up. So again, I know that there are concerns about getting feedback from yourselves by tomorrow, the close of play tomorrow. And as a team, we will go back and look at that. And as I said, we are looking at submitting an application at the end of this month. And ahead of that, we will write to you again, just to sort of go over some of the questions and responses that we've provided today, and also some of the sort of initial feedback that we've had from residents ahead of these consultation events that we're holding today. So, and again, the local authority will be in touch with local residents once an application has been submitted, and that's where the comments that have been received will be assessed by the officer. I do want to say that the comments that we receive from you following this presentation today will be taken into consideration and will be referred to within the submission documents. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for your time, particularly those who've come along today and asked questions. If you do have any further questions or comments, please send those through, and we will do our best to respond to those when we respond ahead of a submission.
Just quick question, Chantal, do we give the feedback to the email address, that Hamilton Road one we initially booked on?
Yes, yes.
And is it close of play tomorrow, or when you say by?
Sorry, close of play tomorrow.
Okay.
So basically up until midnight.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Is there any further questions or comments about feedback or anything further from the presentation panelists today? No. Okay, well, I just want to say thank you to everyone that came along. Those are a really good set of questions, and we hope that we have responded to you fully, and we hope to hear from you each very soon. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.